Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on government relations. I hope you were able to join the webinar without any glitches. We have a pretty small crowd so far, so I think what we'll do is introduce ourselves, and if it's still just 3 attendees and the presenters, we'll keep it a kind of casual conversation rather than a presentation. Oh, more people are chiming in. So we will have those of you who are here introduce yourselves. My name is Anna Freitas. I'm the Policy and Program Manager for the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts.
I'm Jan Lee, Executive Director with OACD. Welcome.
Good morning, I'm Kelly Beamer with the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts.
And I'm Gordon Levitt with the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts. I'm the Legislative Coordinator.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Right now we have some more people who have joined, so it might not be feasible to have everyone introduce themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and give our little introduction to the webinar. This webinar is part of a monthly series from the Oregon Conservation Partnership. We use this forum for training and information exchange with soil and water conservation districts, watershed councils, land trusts, and really anyone who wants to join us as partners. These webinars are offered with support from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, and Pacific Corrugated Pipe Company, a Eugene-based company. We thank them both for their support for this resource. We really appreciate it. We have 5 attendees so far. And before we jump into our presentation, there are a couple housekeeping items. You are all on mute by default, but there are a couple ways you can interact during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. You can type questions into the question bar, and we'll keep an eye on those. And depending on how many other people join, we might answer those during the presentation and turn it into a conversation. If more people join, we'll welcome questions at the end. You can also click the little hand icon to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you when there's a convenient pausing point or at the end of the webinar. There are 2 handouts you can download to look at as we go or look at them later. One is the Government Relations Toolkit, and the other is just a brief list of tips from Jan Lee on how to best engage with decision makers. A reminder for all of you joining us today, these webinars are monthly. We have a variety of topics and presenters. This one happens to be from members of the Conservation Partnership itself, which is kind of fun. But next month we'll be hearing from an outside partner, Chris Jordan of NOAA. His presentation will be on beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures, cost-effective, scalable methods for region-wide stream restoration. These webinars are typically about an hour, sometimes there are shorter ones. If you have ideas for topics or if you have something to share or discuss, you can note that in the survey at the end or send me an email. There's also a short survey. Oh, this short survey at the end is a really important way for us to get feedback so we can continue improving these webinars and communicating with our funders about the benefits we're bringing you. If you would like to receive information on upcoming webinars and make sure you're on that list, you can put your name and email address in the survey. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted by tomorrow night for future viewing. If you know anyone who is not able to join today, encourage them to go to the Network of Oregon Watershed Council's website so they can see that. Okay, let's get started. Today's webinar is Government Relations for Local Conservation Organizations, Furthering Your Conservation Mission Through Partners, Allies, and Advocacy. The presenters today are myself, Anna Freitas, Policy and Program Manager at the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, Jan Lee, Executive Director at OACD, Gordon Levitt, Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts Legislative Coordinator, and Kelly Beamer, the COLT Executive Director. The purpose of this webinar is to help our members learn more about how they can best engage in government relations. When I say government relations, keep in mind that this can mean a lot of different things, and it's going to look different depending on your organization's goals and processes, and it's really up to you on how you can use government relations to further your mission. Our presentation today is more focused on legislation and how to engage in government relations around legislative issues. But there are many other kinds of advocacy that are very important. You're probably engaging in government relations without even realizing it. If you're applying for a permit, you have to interact with government agencies, and that's still government relations. And thinking about kind of the future benefits that partnerships like that can bring can help your organization in the future. Regardless of the kind of government relations you're engaging in, your voice really matters to decision makers and to the future of conservation in Oregon. You might be informing decision makers as a neutral party, or you might be taking a position on a particular issue. Regardless, there's a cost to not engaging. Kelly taught me a great phrase as we were preparing for this webinar. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you could be missing out on some important discussions that will affect your work and the work of your partners. And that could, either lead to problems down the line, or, if you do engage, you might find an opportunity for future partnerships and future benefits. There are competing priorities, so if you're not there, someone else will advocate for their benefits. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe not. So with that, I will turn it over to Jan Lee, the OECD Executive Director, to share her insights.
Hi, as a former legislator, I wanted to share a few things. What's most important to legislators is hearing from the local constituents. And I would encourage you not only to do some lobbying or speaking to your legislator at the Capitol, but also legislators have town halls and all kinds of meetings both in and outside the session. So I found it very helpful to meet with people in the local area, whether it was 50 people at the Grange or 12 people at a breakfast. Getting to hear their issues and their input really made a lot of difference in how I could do my job. It gave me a sense of their issues and how I could work to help resolve some of those issues during the session. Some of those people came back later to help on the campaign, and that was especially great. So that gave us an opportunity to be able to work together in the future as well. It's important to keep in mind that your legislator is not just available to you during the session, but in various formats throughout, back when they're at home, when you can more easily access them, as well as the building. Legislators hear from lobbyists and associations all the time, but you also need to share with them your ideas. They need to hear from you as you're their constituents more so than any lobbyist or anyone else. So make it a point to get to know your legislator both locally and visit at the Capitol. Thanks.
Sorry, I think we're having some technical difficulties here. Gordon, okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Anna? Okay,
Thank you.
sorry about that. Our internet goes down occasionally. So good morning, and I just wanted to share with you one of the things that Colt and the OECD are working on as a legislative priority this session as an example of our organizations and one of our government relations priorities. So that's House Bill 2729, which would fund the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. The bill is currently in Ways and Means, which is the budget committee for the state, and it's a really great example of how you can create partnerships across organizations that don't always work well together. So we have a great group of organizations, including the Farm Bureau, the Cattlemen's Association, 1,000 Friends of Oregon, Oregon Environmental Council, and others that have come together because they see this as a win-win. And some of you may have seen the recent USDA census statistics about farmland loss in Oregon, and we're continuing to lose farmland. So we've all been engaging really diligently this session and over the course of years to build out this program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks might have at the end about OAHP or the funding bill right now. But I do recognize that we're a little behind after technical difficulties, so I'm going to. So it's in the Ways and Means process right now, and awaiting a referral to the subcommittee where it may get a hearing. We're trying to get it a hearing. So with that, move on to Kelly's presentation on House Bill 2020.
Okay. Hi guys. I'm going to put the little mic back on in jeopardy of showing you my really messy office, so apologize for that. I wanted to give a snapshot of HB 2020. This is the proposed climate legislation that Oregon has been discussing for the past 2 legislative sessions. Our partnership is really coalesced around the role of natural and working lands in this program. Our forests, our natural lands, our farm, our ranch lands have a huge role to play in helping Oregon meet our climate goals and helping communities adapt for climate change. And it was really critical to the partnership and the organizations we represent that any new program have a dedicated funding committed to natural and working lands. So we were all, thanks to the folks who engaged, we were all successful in having that put into the most recent bill that's being considered by the Joint Committee for Carbon Reduction. There's a 20% dedication of the Climate Impact Fund for that general investment area. And there has been a lot of tours around the state, an incredible process to try to get input. And it looks like the committee is going to be considering actually voting on the bill this Friday. So stay tuned for that. The partnership will be tracking and let you all know how that goes. So back to you, Anna.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gordon and Kelly, for going over some of our shared policy priorities. Another aspect of policy that you all might be interested in would be agency budgets. So each biennium, agencies propose their budget in a bill in the legislature. This is a slightly more complicated process than a typical bill in some ways, because it starts with an agency requested budget. This is what the agency wants. It also goes into what could be cut if needed. They're required to identify lower priority things that if the state doesn't have a lot of revenue, those things could be cut. Then the governor recommends her version of their budget. And the governor's recommended budget is what shows up in the legislature as the agency budget bill. These agency budget bills have a bill number like any policy, but also kind of as supplemental material to those bills, there are those governor's recommended budget narratives that go into policy option packages. Those are specific items requested in the budget. And this is where we get a little more specific in our testimony. If, for instance, we're looking at the Oregon Department of Agriculture budget, their entire budget isn't all relevant to us. We don't care a lot about weights and measures. I'm sure that's important to some advocates out there, but we're going to look for those policy option packages that really affect conservation in Oregon. This session, HB 5002 is ODA's budget bill. Kelly, I'm going to mute you. Okay. We're looking at a couple specific policy option packages in there benefiting strategic implementation areas and invasive species programs. ODA's budget is interesting when you're thinking about that agency versus governor requested budget, because the noxious weed program policy option package didn't make it into the governor's recommended budget. So the legislature isn't going to pay much attention to that pop unless advocates come and testify saying this is really important and you should include it. Sometimes there are policy option packages in unexpected budgets. So the Department of Land Conservation and Development actually has a policy option package relating to sage grouse conservation. And as associations, OECD, COLT, NOWC, we can help you all keep an eye on those. So I'm going to move into the weeds a little more of the Government Relations Toolkit. The Government Relations Toolkit is available on the OECD website or the Conservation Partnership website. So I encourage you to look more in detail at those. This is not legal advice, so it can help you understand a little more what you can and can't do as a 501c3 or a special district. But when in doubt, consult an expert, call up the Oregon Government Ethics Commission and ask them questions to make sure that all your ducks in a row, that you're not going to get in trouble. Generally speaking, the message here is you're the experts and you can do more than you think. There are limitations on lobbying for 501c3s, but that's specific to lobbying. So you can do a lot with government relations where you're just informing, having kind of a neutral approach. Campaigning also has some limitations. That is, campaigning is when something's on the ballot, the voters are deciding. Whether you're informing, lobbying, campaigning, it's really all about relationships and partnerships. Next slide. The basics of how to approach government relations: plan and coordinate. This is really important to having a timely response to government relations opportunities. Looking at your goals as an organization, what kind of government relations you are already engaging in or want to engage in, how that benefits your mission, and how it helps you connect with your constituents or clients, however you want to call them. Having a strategy and consistency in your positions will really make you a stronger advocate as well. Communicating your accomplishments generally is part of government relations. You can think of it just as PR, but it's going to be important for advocacy as well. And then tracking policy issues, even if you're not taking action, that can be helpful for seeing changes that are happening down the road so you can plan for them. Next slide. So getting into those limitations a little bit, for 501c3 organizations, you can spend up to 5% of your time as an organization or 5% of your budget on lobbying elected officials or participating in public campaigns on ballot measures. You cannot campaign for candidates at all, which is why on that voters pamphlet, there's a check because you can campaign for some measures and policies that voters would vote on, but you can't campaign for individual candidates. As I said, lobbying is a pretty specific definition, and Kelly's going to go into in a moment what you can do and what her members have been able to do under that 5% limit. Next slide. Special districts don't have that 5% limitation. They mostly are just subject to the typical lobbying registration requirements and thresholds that anyone is required to adhere to. So if you spend 24 hours in a calendar quarter on lobbying or spend $100 on lobbying, if you as an employee are expected for part of your job duties to be lobbying, you have to register as a lobbyist. Special districts cannot campaign either on ballot measures or on candidates. So if it's in the voters pamphlet, you can't campaign for it while representing your district. As a note about kind of process in your organization as well, you should have a conversation with your board and managers about who is allowed to advocate on your behalf and at what point can someone say, this is the opinion of my organization if they're submitting testimony. As individuals, you are encouraged to still submit testimony. You can draw on and highlight your experience from your organization. Just make sure you're clear whether you're representing your organization or not. So now I'll turn it over to Kelly to give some examples of how her members and how COLT has engaged in government relations.
Great. Thanks, Anna. I'm going to do a disclaimer that we've had a few little internet fumbles here, so stay with me if my screen pauses. So I wanted to just spend a few minutes trying to kind of talk about how the rubber hits the road with government relations. From my perspective and my experience, you know, this work is all about relationships, which is what you all do every day as conservation professionals. You're building relationships with landowners, you're building relationships with partners, and our government relations work is really just one further tier in that relationship building category. Yes, things come up like climate bills or the Oregon Ag Heritage Program, funding programs that we all use, but it really, you really can't do much unless you have relationships. So what we focused on together are sort of like, what are some easy ways to implement this when you have very busy lives and limited budgets and limited time? And I really believe it just takes some extra thinking and a little additive work to what you're already doing and not starting a whole new program. So I want to give 3 quick examples of ways I feel like we've seen success in building those relationships. So one example is just thinking about the kind of landscapes you work with, the places that are Oregon and that ring home to people and people value. We are so privileged to be able to do the work we do every day on behalf of Oregon's lands and waters. And one of the things that we've done is taken the photos that we get often from volunteers of these places, of these watersheds, of these lands, and be able to give as a gift a picture to an elected official. So you see the slide is a picture of 2 staff at Greenbelt Land Trust, actually staff and a board member, going to a town hall that Senator Wyden had, showing a picture of a restoration project on one of their properties. Senator Wyden has been a champion for some of the federal programs like PCSRF or LWCF that have helped this work happen in Oregon. So this is a way he has a picture to hang on his wall. When he was at a town hall in Wallowa County, Kathleen Ackley gave him a picture of Wallowa Lake that's in his office. And so there's just a physical, tangible connection. Again, there are certain expenditure limits, but I believe you can easily work within those to give a simple gift. Next slide. Second is host an event and invite an elected official to be your champion. I think the onus really lays on us to help bring our elected partners along on the issues we're doing. We're every day involved and so deep and engaged in conservation, but it's important to invite our elected partners to be part of that. A great way is, if you're hosting an event, have them come and speak a little bit about your work, and you can make it easy on them by providing a one-pager with some talking points. And so this is a slide of Representative Kurt Schrader at an event that we held at Keene around the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's a federal funding source to conserve land. We invited Rep. Schrader to show up. His staff were great. They worked with us to put a one-pager together. He was able to just step in, grab the mic, and talk about our work in a way that was really positive. He learned a lot, I think, in that process, and then, followed up with tweets of his own, and we did some social media as well. So it's a really simple way to engage somebody, and so thinking about when you're putting an event together, what's that extra point, that extra invitation that you can make. Next slide. Hosting a tour. We're about to head into a gorgeous summer in Oregon, and there's never a better time to invite our partners, our elected officials, local and statewide, onto the land. Colt and the partnership have come together to host a series of summer tours to bring elected officials on properties where there's incredible partnerships happening. I think that you all do tours anyways on a regular basis. It's a great way. Again, I think legislators are spending a lot of time in the building. You saw that slide of the chamber, that by June they're ready to go. And so this is the slide. We had Representative Brad Witt out on the coast looking at the Rainforest Reserve property, and the photo to the right of that is Representative Cedric Hayden, a state official, visiting the upper McKenzie River, where the Watershed Council and Land Trust have partnered to do a ton of restoration work where this is a drinking water protection program. And so it's really those moments to get out on the land. And we've had those on private ranches, on lands that are private, where the landowner we worked with to open their land and lead a tour. And we've often invited media as well, so that there can be kind of a double benefit of getting a story and securing some earned media, while also having that learning experience for elected officials and their staff. A lot of the time, so much of the work we're doing is with the staff members, so I think it's really important to recognize that and invite them along as well. So those are three just concrete examples I wanted to share. Other ways that you can kind of bring this work into your everyday worlds is through press releases. When you finish a project and you're doing a press release, a great thing to include is a quote from your state elected official. Call their office, tell them about an NRCS grant that you got, or a watershed work day that you're going to send a press release out. Give them a chance. You can even draft the quote, and often that's how it works. So it's a great way to build up champions. Share your successes. If you get an award, let them know. I think your success is also a success for somebody who's representing their community. They want to know the good things that are happening. So if you get positive media or any kind of positive recognition, share that with your local, state, and federal representatives. You all are having events, annual picnics. We see the invitations. Make sure to also extend those invitations to your elected officials. It's always important to also schedule meetings with them. They have time that they come back to their district. It's really important to be able to articulate the public funding programs that you rely on. So many of our work goes back to OWEB, NRCS, SWCDs, these local public funding sources that they need to know about. In a lot of ways, our electeds are our donors to the work that we do. So making sure they know what programs you are using and need to do your work. And a lot of this can fall in the camp of education and outreach and not lobbying. Most of it actually is that education and lobbying work. You know, and lastly, town halls, if you join a mailing list of an elected official, they will send out press releases, and when they have town halls or coffee and letting your members know when those happen, just encourage that engagement or taking some time to show up to talk about what you do. So that's the quick snapshot of, I think, some really easy, practical ways to start bringing this work alive in your organization, and we're all here to help make that happen. Happy to talk more about it. So thank you, and I think I'm going to pass it to Anna to wrap things up.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. So that might have been a lot of information very quickly. I really appreciate Kelly and Gordon and Jan joining me today to help give you all a better picture of government relations and kind of how you can be the experts that you are and communicate with your decision makers. And thank you all for attending today as well to learn about this. Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the question box, but you all are welcome to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I don't see any questions yet. One of our attendees, would you like to share an example of how you've engaged in government relations, or maybe ask about a policy that you're interested in or concerned about, a policy or policy issue? You can raise your hand or send a question. Okay. I don't, oh, there's one. So Angie, I have unmuted you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm with the Nicanicum Watershed Council, and currently there's a bag ban ordinance going around in Astoria and here in Seaside, and there's some confusion about how we address that, because it kind of, you know, that's kind of why I'm tuning into this, is because we have people that are very vocal on the board about wanting to support it, but I also know there's a fine line between the Watershed Council doing it and people that are private citizens doing it. So I kind of want to get your opinion about where the line is.
We had a similar question at Connect about, you know, when you're expected to take a position on something and whether, you know, you might not want to engage in that, depending on kind of your board and agreements. So that's really, this might be a frustrating answer, but it's partly up to your organization having that conversation about, do we want to engage on these policies that might be tangential to our work, or maybe it's just something that there's not a lot of agreement on within your board or within your organization.
Would it be because it's on the ballot? Is that part of that lobbying thing as well, though?
As a nonprofit, you are allowed to campaign on ballot measures. You can't campaign on people running for office. So if it's a person, like, stay out of it. But if it's a policy, then you can definitely engage. And soil and water conservation districts are a little different because they're not nonprofits, they're local government entities, and that's why they're not allowed to engage on that kind of issue unless it's simply informing.
Okay,
that I
thank
can
you.
tell you.
That helps a lot because I just kind of was very confused.
Yeah, it is confusing. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to give you a little information. The plastic bag ban is moving along very rapidly, and there's also a bill against plastic straws and one against styrofoam, and all of those are moving well in the process, just as an update.
Awesome, thank you.
And Angie, this is Kelly. This is actually, in some ways, I know it's hard from your end because you have some board members that want to take, can she hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So some of our members have actually developed an advocacy policy when it could be a good opportunity for you to say, hey, this is a position where the board is kind of landing in different directions. Is this the best way for us to exert our influence in the community? And I'm happy to share Columbia Land Trust, their board recently passed an advocacy policy, and that came up around some of the clean energy legislation that was happening in the city, where they actually realized they had to articulate, like, when do we weigh in? When is it the ED's role versus the board's role? And it might help you institute a process that gives more clarity to that. So I can send you a sample policy just for some context if that's useful.
Oh, that would be really useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly and Angie. Anyone else attending who would be interested in sharing something they are following?
Hey, Anna, I think Kelly's internet went down, so we're on my computer now. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any other questions out there from folks, or are we ready to wrap here?
I'm not seeing anything, so if you all on the line are interested in seeing what other policies we're following, the OECD website, we have a list of our legislative issues we're following. We also have a few rulemaking announcements. So I encourage you all to visit the website, look at the government relations toolkit, look at what policies we're following, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Do we also have the list online that tells districts who their legislators are and how to contact them?
That's not online yet, but good reminder, Jan.
Okay.
Soon we will have a resource available for soil and water conservation districts. That's kind of a directory for which legislators cover your service area with contact information for them. So you can pretty easily just pull that up, and if you want to call up your legislator or send in some testimony or letter of support on something, that should be helpful, I hope. So with that, I think we'll wrap up the webinar again next month on June 20th. Tune in to hear about beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures. And you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Oh, and thank you again to our funders, of course. And I will end the webinar now. I'm sorry, I'm new to this. Gordon, do you see where to, there it is, stop recording. I'm sorry.